Good afternoon. On this here, I'd like to talk for a moment about my dad. He's my business partner and mentor and loving to death. Here he's floated last, earlier this month, he went down to Kansas City for a top producer and farm journal symposium. And one of the reasons I'd like to talk about him for a moment is a lot of times when we implement these regenerative practices, we are partnered with a family member or someone who may not quite believe in some of these things. Yeah. I left him at the casino while I attended the meeting, and I had to hire a chaperone to watch him because he's got a new pair of overalls on. Believe it or not, he's got him chick mag. And I've even seen a old blue-haired woman come up and sit down beside him and start putting money in his machine so he wouldn't get up and wait. At any rate, I think it's important that I talk about this for a moment because a little background on what kind of personality he has. He looks like a pretty sweet old man there, but I'll tell you, if he's stubborn, he's Irish, and so am I. So I told him one time, I said, I never argue unless I know I'm right. And we had to, when he was a young man, he rented a farm not far from his great uncle. And that kind of added insult to injury because he didn't care for his uncle. He didn't think he was very honest. And the reason for that was everybody had milk cows back in those days, and this old boy was just buying these inbred and just a little bit of everything, and he was getting people to pay him to deliver these bulls, or the so-called bulls, over to freshen everybody's cows so they keep lactating. Well, the problem was they had a much closer resemblance to a Tibetan yak than they probably did any sort of bovine. Well, Dad didn't think too much of this, and he had about 200 head of sheep. And this is kind of what he did before he had television. Every morning when he'd do chores, he'd let them sheep out, and they'd run down the hill across the road and go ahead and start grazing all his great uncle's wheat that was coming out. And of course, this was mid-breakfast, and when the uncle would see that, he'd fire up the car, drive down the lane, and come around the edge, up the corner, and into Dad's yard to give half for all that sheep being out. Dad walked down across the road. Woo! All the sheep run back across the road, back into the gate, shut the gate, and all was fine. This was their morning ritual for a while, until one day, Dad's purebred bull got out, and the neighbor's, his uncle's cows were in heat. And of course, the uncle found some reinforcement. He had a neighbor with him that day, and when Grandpa was giving Dad a ride down the road in his old Ford car, they were moving some machinery around, and they met these two fellas in the middle of the road. Well, these two guys hopped out. They were pretty hot under the collar. Dad hopped out. He was hot under the collar. And the message one of the neighbors gave him, he says, well, if you don't have bulls out over there, and he says, if he gets out again, he says, I'm going to make him a steer. And Dad told him, he says, well, he says, I'm going to tell you right now, you'd be better off backing your butt into a buzzsaw as to make that purebred bull of mine steer. He said, furthermore, I'm doing you a favor. He said, that bull down there breeds one of your cows, you're going to have a lot better calves in the spring anyhow. So it was on. These three devils are out there going around in a circle like a bunch of roosters with their spurs out. Now, mind you, the whole time this is going on, my uncle my grandpa, is sitting behind the wheel of the car watching this whole exchange, and he was not a man of very many words. And thankfully, miraculously, they all come to their senses and went back to their respective vehicles. And Dad hops back into the car with my granddad. First thing he says, why didn't you get out and help me? Granddad says, well, it didn't look to me like you needed any. And I'm sure he did. Needless to say, this man's favorite piece of machinery is a Steiger tractor and a sunflower disc. So when I had to announce to him in the spring of 2021 that we were going to unhook that 500 horsepower tractor we have in the yard and park that 50-foot disc, and we were going to plant into standing cover that was green, I'd much rather made that call with a Zoom. You have to do it in person. There was no escape. And So that's kind of how it can go sometimes. But since then, we've decided that maybe this will work okay. I wanted to show you this. This is just a pile of manure that the town gave me. It's composted leaves and whatnot, and we went ahead and spread that on the field. Nobody would utilize this, so the farmers thought that this would be bad for their field. I had it tested. It actually has a similar consistency of chicken litter, about a third of the potency, but the percentages are about the same. It's very high in calcium, so we're interested in seeing what this would do. This is a photograph that Ryan Einiger, who kind of got me into speaking at these things. He worked for Farm Journal a few years ago, and he kind of got me going, and on Jimmy Emmons' transition. But this is a photograph of the pileup we had on May 1st in Iowa due to the dust storm and the blowing. I live about 5 miles from the interstate, same interstate in McCool Junction, Nebraska. That day, we had 60-mile-an-hour winds on my field, and this is what it looked like from my tractor cab. Okay, this is rye cover, so we didn't. There's looking out the back window where a little dust is kicking up, but clearly it's not any danger to anyone on the road. What we have here is a soil test I did on one of my farms, and I'm not going to tell you a whole lot that Dennis hasn't already spoke about, but kind of one thing I'd like to point out is, from what I'm told, and I've just started doing some more intensive soil testing, that Francis Childs and Kip Kohlers and all the guys that win these yield contests, there's 3 things they know. And one of them is they got to have their carbon, organic carbon, down here at the bottom, 300 to 500 parts per million. They like to have their carbon to nitrogen ratio at 15 to 1. And they like to have their bacteria and fungal count at 1 to 1. So those are 3 things they try to achieve. And Dennis, you got a lot better soil work report than I do, but we're improving. One of the things that we've noticed since we started doing cover crops is we're seeing a dramatic increase in organic matter. We had 1.5 to 2% most everywhere. And a lot of these places, it's coming up considerably. We're over 3% in a lot of places in our fields, not all of them, but it's going the right direction. And I would have to agree with him. I've been in a corn and soybean rotation for quite a while. And I had some fields we farmed some pretty rough, upside down clay hills. We got probably some of the roughest ground in York County. And we started planting these cover crops out there. And if you're interested in doing this, you want to try it, or sitting on a fence, I would encourage you to take your worst farm and try that one first. You'll see the biggest yield response. You'll see the biggest improvement. We went from a field that I could never get over 62 bushel soybeans, and we're raising 75 to 80 bushel beans out there pretty consistently now. It's every other year that we've really seen a big improvement. And we've seen some improvement in the good soil, in the river bottom soil, but we've seen the biggest improvement, the biggest leap in the poor soil. So they don't call it regenerative ag for nothing. And I can tell you, Dad's on board. He was telling me the other day, well, maybe we ought to do this a little different. I said, Dad, that mummy quarter never raised 75 bushel beans before in our lives. He said, yeah, that's right. So he knows it. It's working. You can make some money with this. It can help you. And to tell you the truth, it's a little bit more work after harvest. We've just put somebody in a drill right behind the combine wherever we're going. But it's a lot easier in the spring. You may not think so, but it's a lot easier in the spring. We just go out there and plant green, put sprayer right in behind the planter, and pretty well done. So this is some more compost. This is what it looks like up close. I'm doing some in the fields. I've been taking a lot of our cattle and bought some corn stalk bales from the neighbors. You know how it is, always kind of a mess around the hay feeder. I've just been pushing that up in a pile and kind of turning it over and making it in compost on the edge of each field. We're going to see what it does. So got some chicken litter from a guy that has a chicken farm. We're going to try a little bit of that this year. And got some wood shavings that we got from the fella out of Lincoln. See them delivering that there. There's my crawler. I've been turning it over. If anybody does compost, it's a good idea to put 10 to 20% of manure with it, and you want to keep it aerated. Make sure you don't let that get to stinking. If it gets to stinking, you got something wrong. You got to keep air in it. You got to keep an anaerobic environment. That's where the good fungi and mycorrhizal fungi and bacteria are created. There's the cattle. They kind of like it. Smells like silage cooking. So that's some of what we're doing. There's some of my cows. They're happy. There we are spread. Yeah. There's a little bit of rye. I don't have a lot of great pictures of rye, but it's basically the same thing Dennis said. We plant into that stuff, and it's amazing how that protects those little plants on those windy days. He's absolutely correct. I really wouldn't have stood here before you 4 years ago and told you this was going to work. What got me into this is we had, I wanted some cattle feed. I wanted additional cattle feed. And we had, 100 cows, penned them up, and when they calve, it's muddy and a lot. We'd hold them there, so we didn't have enough grass. We didn't want to take them out there until the 1st of June for fear they'd mow it down too much. And I was just having a lot of health problems. Always did have it. It's always frustrated me. I never liked that. So planted, 400 or 500 acres of rye. And I'll never forget, the first year we did that was in the fall of 2020. And by the spring of 2021, really hadn't had much rain. It's been very dry. And the 1st of March, I had rye that was coming up. It was about this size. I put 45 cow-calf pairs out on a quart. And I didn't think they'd have enough to eat, so I took a dairy quality hay bale and round feeder out there, and I put it in the end of the field. We got about a 2-inch rain. It fell about like an Irish toast. It was just soft and gentle and how you would like it. About 10 days later, we got it's my son, FFA tractor day. At least I got him to drive a tractor that day. But we got about 210, and about 10 days later, on the 10th of March, we got 6 inches of rain. Like I say, we farmed some rough ground, and it just dumped it within about 2 hours. So I went out there to check the calves following morning, and I thought, man, I'm going to have ditches. We're going to be working our full tails off this spring. I got 2 Caterpillar twin engine scrapers, and we used to run them all the time filling ditches. They're sitting around like the Maytag repairman. I just will fill them full of dirt, put flowers in. But anyway, I went out there and I looked at those ditches, and they never cut any of the ditches. None of that broke loose, and that rye wasn't very tall. Now, to finish this story, I went out on the 9th of May, and I still had those cows out there, and that was the last field I had to plant. I chased the cows out in the pasture across the road, ran them down the road, pulled in there with the planter and started planting, and it had gotten some growth. We got quite a bit of rain, and I was really glad this worked. But the rye was a lot bigger than I probably would have liked it, and we went ahead and planted it, and everything worked out, thank goodness, because I think my dad would have killed me that day if it hadn't. But the interesting part to the livestock guys is that bale that I put in on the 1st of March, 3/4 of it was still there. We had to go get the loader and move it out of there because they didn't need it all.
Yeah.
So all the health problems, there were 0 scours. Those cows were fat as ticks. The vet's like, it's almost a perfectly balanced diet for a beef cow. You got to supplement a little salt and mineral, and that's really about it. So if you're a livestock producer, you're thinking about doing this is a slam dunk. That's kind of why we started doing it. But we're starting to realize even more so is the health benefits that it's providing to their soil. We're actually seeing our P&K go up just slightly. And the reason that's important in our crop rotation, I'm only putting on about 3 gallons of starter fertilizer with the corn every other year, and it's pretty tough to build phosphorus doing it that way. So something's going on now. Okay.